They forced me to sleep in my car, then made me their CEO. Have you ever watched your entire life fall apart? Not because you were lazy, not because you failed, but because someone needed a person to blame? Have you ever gone from sitting in a manager's office to sleeping in the back seat of an old car, wondering if tomorrow would finally be the day you gave up? This is the story of a man who lost everything except his determination. A man who was betrayed by the company he gave 10 years of his life to. A man who was forced to wash his face in public restrooms, sleep in freezing parking lots, and pretend everything was fine while his world collapsed around him. But life has a strange way of rewarding those who refuse to quit. Years later, the same company that threw him away like he was nothing would beg him to come back, not as an employee, not as a manager, but as their chief executive officer. This is not just a story about success. It is a story about dignity, resilience, second chances, and proving that your worst chapter never has to become your final one. 10 years earlier, every morning at exactly 7:30, Ethan Carter parked his silver sedan in the same parking space outside Harrison Industrial Solutions. He was always the first employee to arrive. While others rushed in carrying coffee cups and checking their phones, Ethan unlocked his office, reviewed production reports, and planned the day's operations before anyone else walked through the doors. For nearly 10 years, Harrison Industrial Solutions had been more than a workplace. It had become his second home. He knew almost every employee by name. He celebrated birthdays with warehouse workers. He stayed late whenever deadlines became impossible. If a machine broke down at midnight, Ethan showed up. If a client threatened to cancel a contract, Ethan handled the meeting himself. If another department needed help, he never said no. His coworkers often joked, "Does Ethan even go home?" He would simply laugh. Eventually, the truth was, he genuinely loved his job, not because it made him rich. It didn't, but because it gave him purpose. At 35 years old, Ethan had built a quiet, comfortable life. He rented a modest apartment across town. He drove a 10-year-old sedan that still ran surprisingly well. He wasn't interested in expensive watches or luxury vacations. Every month, after paying his bills, he sent part of his salary to help his widowed mother, who lived alone in a small countryside home. Whenever she thanked him, he always gave the same answer. "You spent your life taking care of me. Now it's my turn." His mother, Margaret, would smile proudly. "I always knew your kindness would become your greatest strength." Ethan believed her. He believed honesty mattered. He believed loyalty mattered. He believed hard work was always rewarded. He had no idea how wrong he was about to be. One Monday morning, rumors spread across the office before anyone had even logged into their computers. "A new executive is coming. They say he's been hired to save the company. The board wants major changes." Employees whispered nervously in the hallways. Sales had been declining for nearly a year. Costs were rising. Several important clients had left. Nobody knew what would happen next. At exactly 9 o'clock, every department was called into the main conference room. The room fell silent as the company's chairman stepped onto the stage. Standing beside him was a sharply dressed man in an expensive navy suit. He looked confident, calculated, almost cold. The chairman smiled politely. "I'd like everyone to welcome our new Chief Operating Officer, Victor Langford." Polite applause filled the room. Victor nodded once before stepping toward the microphone. "I appreciate the warm welcome." His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. "I've spent the last 15 years restructuring struggling companies. I believe every business problem has a solution." He paused, scanning the room. But solving problems requires difficult decisions. The atmosphere instantly changed. Employees exchanged worried glances. Victor continued, "Over the next few weeks, every department will be reviewed. We will identify inefficiencies. We will eliminate waste. And we will hold people accountable." No one spoke. No one even moved. The meeting ended only minutes later, but the feeling it left behind lingered all day. As employees slowly returned to their desks, conversations became quieter. People who had once laughed together now spoke in whispers. Everyone feared becoming the next target. Ethan tried not to think about it. He had survived countless company changes before. He believed his work spoke for itself. That afternoon, Victor walked through the operations department for the first time. He stopped outside Ethan's office. Without knocking, he stepped inside. "So, you're Ethan Carter." Ethan immediately stood. Yes, sir. Victor glanced around the office. Production charts covered the walls. Schedules filled the whiteboard. Everything was organized. You've been here almost 10 years. That's right. Victor picked up one of the reports from Ethan's desk. You must know this company very well. I'd like to think so. Victor smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind that made people uncomfortable. We'll see. Without another word, he placed the report back on the desk and walked away. Ethan watched him leave. Something about the man's behavior felt strange, for reasons he couldn't explain. A quiet feeling settled deep inside him. A feeling that warned him. His life was about to change forever. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Harrison Industrial Solutions 15 minutes earlier than usual. The parking lot was almost empty. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. The familiar security guard greeted him with a smile. Morning, Mr. Carter. Morning, Tom. Inside the building, the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the hallways. Employees slowly began arriving, chatting about weekend plans and upcoming projects. If someone had looked around that morning, they would never have guessed that the company was quietly standing on the edge of a storm. Ethan walked into his office and switched on his computer. The production numbers from the previous week appeared on the screen. Several orders had been completed ahead of schedule. Customer complaints had dropped by nearly 20%. Warehouse efficiency had reached its highest level in almost 2 years. He smiled. That's good news. He printed the reports, planning to present them during the weekly executive meeting. He believed the numbers would finally prove that his department was performing well. He had no idea. Facts wouldn't matter anymore. At exactly 9 o'clock, the department managers gathered inside the executive conference room. Victor Langford entered carrying a black leather folder. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't holding a coffee cup. He wasn't smiling. Without saying good morning, he connected his laptop to the large screen. A graph appeared. Red lines covered the display. Our company has lost nearly $12 million over the last 18 months. The room became silent. Victor slowly walked across the room. This level of failure is unacceptable. He clicked to the next slide. Production delays, late deliveries, lost contracts, customer complaints. Every problem the company had faced appeared one after another. Then, Victor stopped speaking. He turned toward Ethan. Mr. Carter, you manage operations. Correct. Ethan nodded. Yes. Victor folded his arms. So tell us, why has your department failed this company? The question caught everyone by surprise. Ethan calmly stood. With respect, sir. My department has actually improved over the last year. He handed printed reports around the table. Our delivery times have improved. Production costs are lower. And customer satisfaction has increased. Several managers quietly looked through the papers. One of them nodded. The numbers are accurate. For a moment, it looked as though the meeting might end there. Then Victor smiled. A slow, confident, almost dangerous smile. I expected that answer. He pressed another key. A completely different report appeared on the screen. The figures didn't match Ethan's reports. According to Victor's presentation, operations had become the company's biggest financial problem. The room filled with whispers. Ethan stared at the screen. His heart skipped a beat. That's impossible. He stepped closer. I've never seen these reports before. Victor looked directly at him. Are you suggesting these documents are false? I'm saying they aren't the reports from my department. Victor slowly closed his laptop. Interesting. The chairman leaned forward. Mr. Carter, are you denying responsibility? Ethan answered immediately. I'm denying inaccurate information. I can verify every report I submitted. Victor casually reached into his folder. He placed several signed documents onto the table. They're already verified. Ethan picked up one page. His eyes widened. His electronic approval signature appeared at the bottom. But he had never signed it. Someone had copied it. Every page carried his name. Every decision appeared to come from him. Every mistake, every loss, every financial failure pointed directly at Ethan Carter. He looked around the room. This isn't real. I never approved these numbers. No one spoke. Some managers lowered their eyes. Others simply avoided looking at him. Victor broke the silence. Perhaps your memory is failing you. Ethan's voice grew firmer. My memory is perfectly fine. And someone has manipulated these records. Victor looked toward the chairman. You see. No accountability. Only excuses. The chairman sighed heavily. I think that's enough. The meeting ended moments later. But Ethan knew something terrible had just begun. Later that afternoon, his closest coworker, Daniel Brooks, quietly entered Ethan's office and closed the door behind him. You need to be careful. Ethan looked up. What do you mean? Daniel lowered his voice. I overheard Victor talking to 2 board members. He wants to replace half the senior managers. Ethan frowned. Then why target me? Daniel hesitated. I think you make it difficult for him. Ethan looked confused. How? Because everyone trusts you. If he removes the most respected manager first, the others won't fight back. The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. For 10 years, he had believed loyalty protected people. Now, it seemed loyalty had made him the easiest target. Daniel stood up. I shouldn't even be telling you this. But you're my friend. Watch your back. As he reached the door, he stopped. Oh, one more thing. Victor requested access to all your company files yesterday. Ethan's stomach tightened. He hadn't approved that request. He slowly turned toward his computer. For the first time since joining Harrison Industrial Solutions, he opened every important file he had ever created. And what he found made the color drain from his face. Entire reports had been altered. Financial records had been edited. Emails had disappeared. Someone wasn't just trying to fire him. Someone was carefully rewriting history, so that when he finally fell, no one would question why. Victor's warning echoed inside Ethan's mind long after everyone had gone home. Someone had entered his files. Someone had changed official records. Someone wanted him to become the perfect villain. But one question refused to leave his mind. Who? He spent the next 3 hours comparing old printed reports with the files stored on his computer. Every page told the same story. Numbers had been altered. Dates had been changed. Entire paragraphs had disappeared. Yet every document still carried his digital approval. It was almost perfect. Almost. Then, he noticed something strange. One spreadsheet contained a timestamp. 2:17 a.m. Ethan frowned. At 2:17 that morning, he had been asleep. His office computer had been turned off. He printed the document immediately. This is it. Someone made a mistake. For the first time in days, he felt hopeful. If he could prove the files had been edited after he left the office, everything would change. The next morning, Ethan walked straight to the IT department. A young technician named Kevin looked up from his desk. Morning, Ethan. I need your help. Kevin smiled. Sure. What happened? Ethan placed the printed report on the desk. I need the server activity logs. I think someone accessed my files after hours. Kevin's smile disappeared. He looked around nervously before lowering his voice. I can't. Why not? Last week, Mr. Langford restricted access. Only executive management can request those logs now. Ethan stared at him. Since when? Kevin sighed. Since the day after he arrived. Something wasn't right. Victor hadn't just changed company policies. He had removed every path that could expose the truth. That afternoon, another email appeared in Ethan's inbox. Executive performance review. His meeting was scheduled for 4 o'clock. Everyone knew what that meant. Employees who entered those meetings rarely came back smiling. At exactly 4, Ethan knocked on the conference room door. Come in. Victor sat alone. No chairman. No HR representative. Just Victor. He motioned toward the chair. Sit down. Ethan remained standing. I'd rather stand. Victor smiled. Suit yourself. He opened a thin folder. I've reviewed your employment history. 10 years. Impressive. He slowly turned another page. You've never received a disciplinary warning. No complaints. No ethics violations. He looked directly at Ethan. Quite an image you've built. Ethan answered calmly. I earned it. Victor leaned back. That's the problem. The room fell silent. Ethan narrowed his eyes. I don't understand. Victor's voice became colder. This company is changing. I need leaders who follow direction, not people who inspire loyalty. For the first time, everything became clear. This had never been about company losses. It wasn't about performance. Victor wasn't trying to save the business. He was eliminating anyone who couldn't be controlled. Ethan spoke carefully. So, you decided that person was me. Victor didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled. You catch on quickly. Before Ethan could respond, there was a knock at the door. The Human Resources Director entered, carrying a sealed envelope. Her expression looked uneasy. She handed it to Victor without saying a word. Victor slid it across the table. You should read it. Ethan opened the envelope. His hands remained steady. His heart did not. The first line read, Notice of termination. His employment was effective immediately. Reason, gross negligence resulting in financial losses. Ethan looked up slowly. This is based on fabricated reports. Victor folded his hands. Those reports are now official company records. You'll have plenty of time to argue with yourself. Ethan stood silently for several seconds. 10 years. 10 years of loyalty. Reduced to a single sheet of paper. He looked at the HR director. She couldn't even meet his eyes. He looked at Victor. You know I'm innocent. Victor answered without emotion. In business, innocence doesn't matter. Only perception. Ethan carefully folded the termination letter. He picked up the small, framed photograph of his mother from the desk. Then he collected his jacket. Nothing else. As he reached the door, Victor spoke one final time. You should consider yourself lucky. You still have your car. Ethan paused. He didn't answer. He simply walked away. The news spread through the office within minutes. Employees watched quietly as Ethan carried a small cardboard box through the hallway. Some wanted to speak. Others wanted to apologize. But fear kept them silent. Daniel stepped forward. I'm so sorry. Ethan forced a faint smile. This isn't your fault. They shook hands. Neither man knew. It would be the last time they would see each other for years. Outside, Ethan placed the box inside the trunk of his old silver sedan. He looked back at the building that had been his second home for a decade. The company logo reflected in the evening sunlight. For years, he had walked through those doors believing loyalty would protect him. Today, he left with nothing except a box of personal belongings and a future more uncertain than ever. He started the engine, not knowing that within a few weeks, that old car would become the only home he had left, then drove through the city with no destination in mind. Rush hour traffic surrounded him. People hurried home after work. Families laughed inside restaurants. Children played in nearby parks. Life continued as if nothing had happened. But for Ethan, everything had changed. For the first time in 10 years, he had nowhere to be tomorrow morning. No office, no meetings, no purpose, only silence. That evening, he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building. He climbed the stairs slowly, unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment felt unusually quiet. He placed the cardboard box on the kitchen table. Inside were only a few personal belongings. A framed picture of his mother. A coffee mug from his first year at Harrison Industrial Solutions. A notebook filled with ideas. And a small crystal award engraved with the words, Employee of the Year. Ethan stared at it for several seconds. Then he let out a quiet laugh. Funny. Yesterday I was Employee of the Year. Today, I'm unemployed. He placed the award inside a drawer and closed it. Some memories hurt too much to look at. The following morning, Ethan woke up before sunrise out of habit. For a moment, he forgot everything. He reached for his phone to check work emails. Then reality hit him. There were no emails, no meetings, no reason to rush. He slowly got out of bed and opened his laptop. For the next 8 hours, he applied for every management position he could find. Operations manager, plant director, business consultant, supply chain executive, anything that matched his experience. Every application carried the same message. 10 years of leadership, proven results, available immediately. When he finally closed the laptop, he had submitted 43 job applications. He felt hopeful. Someone would call. They had to. A week passed. Not a single interview. Not a single phone call. Only automated rejection emails. We appreciate your interest. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you success in your future endeavors. Each message sounded more empty than the last. 2 weeks later, his savings had already begun disappearing. Rent, electricity, insurance, food. The bills didn't care whether he had a job. One afternoon, his landlord knocked on the door. Ethan, I hate having this conversation. Ethan nodded. I know. You've always paid on time. But you're already 2 weeks behind. I can give you another month. But after that, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ethan understood. I appreciate your patience. The landlord smiled sadly. I hope things get better. So do I. Days turned into weeks. Ethan attended interview after interview. Every conversation began well. Recruiters admired his experience, his leadership, his achievements. Then they contacted Harrison Industrial Solutions for a reference. Everything changed. One recruiter finally spoke honestly. I'm sorry, Ethan. Off the record, your former employer says you were responsible for major financial losses. Ethan's heart sank. That's not true. I believe you. The recruiter sighed. But companies don't like taking risks. I'm truly sorry. The call ended. Ethan sat in complete silence. Victor hadn't just taken his job. He had destroyed his reputation. Exactly 6 weeks after losing his job, Ethan checked his bank account. The balance wasn't enough to cover next month's rent. He looked around the apartment. There wasn't much to sell. An old television, a small dining table, a bookshelf. He sold almost everything. It still wasn't enough. 3 days later, he packed the rest of his belongings into cardboard boxes. The landlord stood quietly outside the apartment. I wish this had ended differently. Ethan smiled weakly. So do I. He loaded the final box into the trunk of his old silver sedan. Then he handed over the apartment keys. As the door closed behind him, he realized something painful. For the first time since he was a child, he no longer had a home. That night, Ethan drove until the streets became quiet. Eventually, he found a 24-hour supermarket with a large parking lot. Several trucks were parked nearby. No one paid attention to an old sedan parked in the far corner. He turned off the engine, folded the back seats down as far as they would go, placed his jacket beneath his head as a pillow, and covered himself with a thin blanket he had kept in the trunk. Rain gently tapped against the windows. The inside of the car quickly became cold. He stared through the windshield at the dark sky. Just 6 weeks earlier, he had managed a team of over 200 employees. Now, his entire life fit inside one car. His stomach growled. He had skipped dinner to save money. He closed his eyes, trying to ignore the hunger. Before falling asleep, he reached into the glove compartment. Inside was an old photograph of him and his mother. He smiled softly. I'll figure this out. I promised you I'd never quit. Outside, the rain continued falling. Cars came and went. No one noticed the man sleeping quietly in the old silver sedan. No one knew that the future CEO of one of the country's largest companies was spending his very first night homeless. The first night inside his car felt endless. Every few minutes, Ethan woke up because of the cold. The seat wasn't made for sleeping. His neck ached. His back hurt. The windows slowly fogged from his breathing. Outside, the city kept moving. Delivery trucks came and went. People filled their shopping carts before driving home to warm houses. Nobody noticed the man sleeping quietly inside an old silver sedan. As the first rays of sunlight appeared, Ethan opened his eyes. For a few seconds, he forgot where he was. Then reality returned. He wasn't parked outside his apartment. He wasn't getting ready for work. This car was now his home. He sat up slowly and looked around. His clothes were wrinkled. His hair was a mess. He reached for a bottle of water from the passenger seat and washed his face using a small towel. Then he looked into the rearview mirror. You'll survive this. He whispered the words to himself, not because he believed them completely, but because he needed to hear them. Later that morning, Ethan drove to a nearby public gym. Months earlier, he had purchased the cheapest monthly membership, hoping to exercise after work. Now, the gym had become something much more important. It gave him access to a shower. He walked inside carrying a small backpack. The receptionist smiled politely. Good morning. Morning. He showered quickly, shaved carefully, pressed his only business suit as neatly as he could using the hand dryer. By the time he left, nobody would have guessed he had slept inside his car. That was exactly how Ethan wanted it. He refused to let the world see how broken his life had become. His phone suddenly rang. The screen displayed an unknown number. His heart raced. He answered immediately. Hello, this is Ethan Carter. A cheerful voice replied. Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'm calling from Summit Logistics. We reviewed your resume. Ethan smiled for the first time in days. Thank you. We'd like to invite you for an interview this afternoon. I'll be there. After ending the call, he closed his eyes for a moment. Maybe this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The interview went almost perfectly. The hiring manager admired Ethan's experience, his leadership, his problem-solving skills. Even his references from earlier years impressed them. At the end of the meeting, the manager smiled. I think you'd fit our company very well. Ethan felt hope returning. Then came the final question. We'll just complete a routine background verification. That won't be a problem, right? Ethan nodded confidently. Not at all. 2 days later, his phone rang again. He already knew the answer before picking up. The hiring manager sounded uncomfortable. Mr. Carter, I'm really sorry. After reviewing additional information from your previous employer, we've decided not to move forward. Ethan remained silent. I'm sorry. The line disconnected. He slowly lowered the phone. Another opportunity. Gone. Not because he lacked talent, but because someone had poisoned his reputation. Weeks passed. Ethan continued living inside his car. His daily routine became almost mechanical. Wake up before sunrise. Drive to the gym. Take a shower. Search for jobs. Attend interviews. Eat the cheapest meal he could find. Sleep in another parking lot. Repeat. 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 Days blended into weeks. Weeks blended into months. Sometimes he parked near a quiet lake. Sometimes outside 24-hour supermarkets. Sometimes beside truck stops where nobody asked questions. Every night, he reminded himself of one promise. I'll never give up. One rainy evening, Ethan parked beneath an old streetlight outside a public library. He couldn't afford internet at a cafe anymore. The library's free Wi-Fi reached the parking lot. Sitting inside his car, he uploaded another dozen job applications. Hours passed. Nothing. He closed the laptop and rested his head against the steering wheel. For the first time, he felt completely exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. He quietly asked himself, what if Victor wins? What if nobody ever believes me again? Before he could answer, a loud knock echoed against his window. Startled, Ethan looked up. A security guard stood outside holding an umbrella. He rolled the window down slightly. I'm sorry, sir. You can't stay here overnight. Ethan nodded respectfully. I understand. The guard looked inside the car. Blanket, suitcase, cardboard boxes. His expression softened immediately. You've been living in here, haven't you? Ethan hesitated, then quietly answered, just until I get back on my feet. The guard remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed Ethan a small paper bag. I was about to eat dinner, but I think you need it more than I do. Inside the bag was a warm sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water. Ethan looked up, speechless. I can't take this. The guard smiled. You can. My father went through the same thing years ago. He always told me, the worst thing about being homeless isn't the hunger. It's feeling invisible. He gently tapped the roof of Ethan's car. I see you. Then he walked away into the rain. Ethan sat there holding the warm paper bag. His eyes slowly filled with tears. In the middle of the darkest season of his life, kindness had come from a complete stranger. And at that very moment, without realizing it, life was already preparing to open a door, far greater than any job application he had ever submitted. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise, just as he had every day for the past 3 months. The parking lot was still quiet. He folded his blanket carefully and placed it back inside the trunk. Even though he owned almost nothing, he believed discipline was something no one could take away. He drove to the gym, took a quick shower, ironed his shirt as best he could, and walked out looking like any other office worker. No one could tell that everything he owned was sitting inside an old silver sedan. By noon, Ethan had already received 3 more rejection emails. He barely reacted anymore. Instead of feeling angry, he simply deleted them. Some battles weren't worth fighting. His phone buzzed again. Another rejection. Then another. He sighed and placed the phone back into his pocket. Maybe today wouldn't be any different. To clear his mind, Ethan drove to a small coffee shop near the business district. He ordered the cheapest coffee on the menu and opened his laptop. If companies refused to hire him, he would continue learning. 4 hours, he studied business case studies, market trends, and leadership strategies. While everyone else saw unemployment, Ethan saw preparation. You can't control opportunity, he whispered, but you can control whether you're ready when it comes. Late that afternoon, a loud argument broke out near the entrance of the cafe. Several people turned to look. A middle-aged man wearing an expensive suit was speaking into his phone. No! I don't care what the consultant said. If we lose this contract, we lose everything. He ended the call in frustration. As he hurried toward the exit, a thick folder slipped from his briefcase. Papers scattered across the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Ethan rushed over. Sir, you dropped these. The man looked surprised. Thank you. As Ethan helped gather the papers, his eyes briefly landed on one page. It contained production forecasts, supply chain reports, and inventory losses. Without thinking, Ethan quietly said, Your warehouse isn't the real problem. The man looked at him. What did you say? Ethan hesitated. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. The man folded his arms. No. Go ahead. You noticed something. Ethan looked down at the report. Your inventory losses are only a symptom. The real issue is delayed supplier rotation. You've tied too much capital into slow-moving stock. If you reorganize purchasing instead of cutting production, you'll improve cash flow within 90 days. The stranger stared at him. You figured that out. From one page. Ethan smiled modestly. I've spent most of my career solving problems like this. The man studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. My name is Richard Morgan. I'm the owner of Morgan Manufacturing. Ethan shook his hand. Ethan Carter. Richard suddenly frowned. Carter, have we met before? I don't think so. Richard nodded slowly. Interesting. He pulled a business card from his wallet. I'd like you to visit my office tomorrow morning. Ethan looked surprised. I appreciate that, but I'm not looking for charity. Richard smiled. Good. Neither am I. I'm looking for someone who can solve problems. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Morgan Manufacturing. The building wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the tallest office in the city, but the atmosphere inside was completely different from Harrison Industrial Solutions. Employees greeted each other with genuine smiles. People looked busy, not afraid. Richard met Ethan personally in the lobby. I'm glad you came. He led Ethan into a conference room where several department managers were already waiting. One of them looked confused. Who's he? Richard smiled. Someone who's about to tell us why we've been losing money. Everyone looked at Ethan. He hadn't prepared a presentation. He hadn't expected an audience. Richard placed a thick stack of company reports on the table. You have 1 hour. Find whatever everyone else has missed. The room fell silent. Ethan opened the first file. His eyes moved quickly across the numbers. Sales reports, shipping records, employee schedules, supplier contracts, production costs. He became so focused that he completely forgot everyone was watching him. Exactly 56 minutes later, he closed the final folder. Then he stood up. I found 8 problems. The managers exchanged skeptical looks. Richard smiled. I'm listening. Ethan walked toward the whiteboard. One by one, he explained every mistake. He showed where money was being wasted, why deliveries were delayed, why customers were leaving, and most importantly, how to fix every issue without laying off a single employee. By the time he finished, the conference room was completely silent. One manager slowly whispered, He's right. Another quickly checked the reports. How did we miss this? Richard looked at Ethan with a smile that grew wider every second. For the first time in months, someone wasn't looking at Ethan as a failed employee. They were looking at him as an extraordinary leader. Richard folded his arms and said, Mr. Carter, I think it's time we talked about your future. Ethan had no idea that this meeting would become the turning point that changed his life forever. Richard Morgan remained standing in front of the conference room window. For several moments, he didn't say a word. The 8 department managers were still staring at the whiteboard Ethan had filled with notes. Production costs, inventory flow, supplier delays, customer retention. Every problem that had confused the company for months, Ethan had identified in less than an hour. Finally, Richard turned around. Everyone except Mr. Carter. You may leave. The managers quietly gathered their files and walked out. As the last door closed, Richard smiled. I've spent 6 months paying consultants hundreds of thousands of dollars. They gave me colorful presentations, fancy charts, complicated words. He looked directly at Ethan. You gave me solutions. Ethan smiled modestly. I've always believed problems don't need complicated answers. They need honest ones. Richard nodded. I like that. He walked toward his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a simple employment contract. I'm offering you a position. Ethan looked down at the papers. Senior Business Strategy Consultant. The salary was more than he had earned at Harrison Industrial Solutions. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Richard noticed his hesitation. What's wrong? Ethan slowly looked up. May I ask you something? Of course. Why me? Richard laughed softly. Because talent is rare. But character is priceless. He paused. And I always hire people with both. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. He extended his hand. I'd be honored. Richard shook it firmly. Welcome to Morgan Manufacturing. That evening, instead of celebrating, Ethan quietly drove back to the same supermarket parking lot. He sat inside his car with the signed contract resting on the passenger seat. He looked around the tiny space that had been his home. The folded blanket, the cardboard boxes, the old steering wheel he had held through countless lonely nights. He gently placed his hand on the dashboard. You kept me safe. Just a little longer. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. His first week at Morgan Manufacturing surprised everyone. Most consultants spent days reading reports before making suggestions. Ethan spent his first morning walking through the factory floor. He spoke with machine operators, warehouse workers, delivery drivers, cleaning staff, people others rarely listened to. One supervisor quietly asked, Why aren't you meeting with executives? Ethan smiled. Because the people doing the work usually know the real problems. Word spread quickly through the company. The new consultant actually listened. Within days, employees began sharing ideas they had kept silent about for years. Ethan filled notebook after notebook. Every suggestion mattered. 3 weeks later, Richard called another executive meeting. The atmosphere felt completely different. Sales charts covered the large screen. This time, the lines were green. Inventory waste had dropped by 23%. Shipping delays had been reduced by nearly 40%. Customer complaints were falling every week. One executive looked at the numbers in disbelief. I've never seen improvements happen this quickly. Richard smiled. Neither have I. Then he looked toward Ethan. Would you like to explain how you did it? Ethan stood. I didn't. Everyone looked confused. The employees did. I simply gave them permission to be heard. The room fell silent. Richard couldn't hide his smile. That answer told him everything he needed to know about the man standing before him. Over the next 18 months, Morgan Manufacturing transformed completely. The struggling company became one of the fastest-growing manufacturers in the region. Business magazines began publishing articles about its remarkable turnaround. Headlines appeared across the country. The company that refused to fail. Unknown consultant leads historic business comeback. Leadership through integrity. Although Ethan's name wasn't always in the headlines, people inside the business world began asking the same question. Who is the strategist behind Morgan Manufacturing? His reputation quietly spread from one boardroom to another. Companies started requesting meetings with him. Investors wanted his advice. Business schools invited him to speak. The man who couldn't get a job interview was now turning down consulting offers. One evening, Richard invited Ethan to dinner. As they finished their meal, Richard placed a newspaper on the table. The front page carried a shocking headline. Harrison Industrial Solutions reports record losses. Ethan stared silently at the article. Factories were closing. Major clients had canceled contracts. Investors were pulling out. The company that had once fired him without mercy was collapsing. Richard noticed his expression. You used to work there. Ethan nodded. For 10 years. Richard leaned forward. Do you miss it? Ethan thought for a long moment. Then he smiled peacefully. No. I miss the people. But I don't miss the place. Richard nodded with respect. You've learned something many successful people never do. What's that? Never confuse a building with the people who gave it meaning. Ethan looked at the newspaper one last time before folding it closed. He felt no satisfaction, no anger, no desire for revenge, only gratitude, because if Harrison had never forced him out, he would never have discovered the life waiting on the other side of his greatest loss. What Ethan didn't know was that the board of Harrison Industrial Solutions had just scheduled an emergency meeting. Their company was weeks away from bankruptcy, and before that meeting ended, one name would change everything. Ethan Carter. The emergency board meeting at Harrison Industrial Solutions lasted nearly 4 hours. For the first time in the company's history, no one argued, no one blamed another department. The financial reports lying on the conference table were impossible to ignore. Losses had reached nearly $180 million. 3 major investors had already withdrawn their support. 2 factories had been forced to shut down. Banks had begun refusing additional loans. The atmosphere inside the room felt heavier than ever before. The chairman slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. We're running out of options. No one answered. Victor Langford, the man who had once walked into the company full of confidence, looked nothing like that executive anymore. His expensive suits remained the same, but the confidence had disappeared. For nearly 2 years, every decision he made had pushed the company closer to collapse. One board member finally broke the silence. We hired consultants. They failed. We changed suppliers. They failed. We restructured departments. That failed too. Another director quietly added, if we don't find a solution within 60 days, there won't be a company left to save. The room became silent again. Then, one elderly board member slowly pushed a business magazine across the table. Its cover displayed a familiar face. Ethan Carter. Beneath his photograph, the headline read, "The business strategist behind America's most remarkable manufacturing comeback." Everyone stared at the magazine. Victor's expression immediately changed. The chairman looked at him. "You know him?" Victor answered quietly. "Yes. He used to work here." Another director frowned. "Used to. He was our operations manager." The room suddenly filled with confused voices. "You fired someone like this?" "No one told us he was responsible for Morgan Manufacturing's success." "How did we lose him?" Victor remained silent. The chairman looked directly into his eyes. "I asked you a question." Victor hesitated, then finally admitted, "He was terminated for poor performance." Another board member immediately picked up the magazine. Poor performance? This man just saved an entire company. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. One director requested Ethan's old personnel file. 10 minutes later, the human resources director returned carrying a thick folder. The chairman slowly opened it. Performance reviews, annual evaluations, leadership awards, employee recognition certificates. Every single report described Ethan the same way. Outstanding leader, exceptional integrity, highly respected by employees. The chairman slowly closed the folder, then looked toward Victor. "You fired our best employee and replaced him with this?" He pointed toward the latest financial report. Victor had no answer. For the first time since joining Harrison Industrial Solutions, he couldn't defend himself. Across town, Ethan knew nothing about the meeting. He was finishing another long day at Morgan Manufacturing. The company had just signed its biggest international contract. Employees celebrated throughout the building. Richard Morgan raised a glass during the evening reception. A toast to the man who changed this company. Everyone applauded. Ethan smiled modestly. "I didn't do it alone." Richard laughed. "I knew you'd say that." He turned toward the employees. "This is exactly why he deserves every bit of success." The applause grew even louder. The following morning, Ethan arrived at work as usual. As he walked through the lobby, his assistant hurried toward him. "Mr. Carter, you have an unexpected visitor." "Who is it?" They refused to give their name. They only said, "It's extremely important." Ethan looked surprised. "Send them in." A few minutes later, the office door slowly opened. 3 people entered together. The chairman of Harrison Industrial Solutions, the human resources director, and one elderly board member. Ethan immediately recognized them. He stood politely. "Good morning." The chairman smiled awkwardly. "It's been a long time." "It has." For several uncomfortable seconds, no one spoke. Finally, the chairman took a deep breath. "We owe you an apology." Ethan remained calm. "I appreciate that, but I don't think you've come here just to apologize." The chairman nodded. "You're right." He carefully placed a folder on Ethan's desk. "Our company is in serious trouble. We need someone capable of saving it." Ethan didn't touch the folder. The chairman continued, "After reviewing everything, we've realized letting you go was the biggest mistake this company has ever made." Silence filled the office. The human resources director lowered her eyes. "We should have protected you." "I'm sorry." Ethan looked at each of them quietly, then finally asked, "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The chairman answered honestly, "We want you to come back." Ethan smiled politely. "As operations manager?" The chairman slowly shook his head. "No." He pushed the folder closer. Inside was an official proposal approved by the entire board of directors. Across the top of the first page were 5 words that Ethan never imagined he would read. Chief Executive Officer Employment Agreement. For a long moment, he simply stared at the document. The same company that had forced him to sleep inside his car was now asking him to lead it. The irony was almost unbelievable. But Ethan didn't open the contract. Instead, he gently closed the folder, then looked directly at the chairman. "I'll think about it." The 3 executives exchanged nervous glances, because for the first time, the future of Harrison Industrial Solutions was no longer in their hands. Ethan didn't touch the contract. He simply looked at it for several long seconds. The words printed across the top of the page seemed almost unreal. Chief Executive Officer Employment Agreement. 2 years earlier, the same company had escorted him out of the building with a cardboard box. Today, they were asking him to return as their highest-ranking executive. Life truly had a strange sense of humor. The chairman finally broke the silence. "We understand this is unexpected." Ethan looked up. "Unexpected?" He smiled faintly. "I don't think that's the right word." The room became quiet. "I gave this company 10 years of my life. I missed birthdays. I canceled vacations. I worked weekends. I believed loyalty mattered." He paused. "And one afternoon, you threw me away without even asking for the truth." No one could argue. Every word was true. The human resources director slowly stood. Tears filled her eyes. "I've wanted to apologize for a long time. I should have spoken up. I knew something wasn't right. But I was afraid." Ethan nodded respectfully. "I understand." She shook her head. "No. I understand now. I was protecting my job, but I failed to protect an innocent man." The guilt in her voice was impossible to fake. The chairman took a deep breath. "We've conducted an independent investigation." He placed another folder on the desk. "We found evidence that company records were deliberately altered." Ethan looked at him. "By whom?" The chairman answered quietly. "Victor Langford." The room fell silent. "Our forensic auditors recovered deleted server logs. They confirmed your digital signature was copied. Financial reports were manipulated. Emails were deleted. The evidence is overwhelming." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, not because he was angry, but because after 2 long years, the truth had finally been spoken aloud. "Where is Victor now?" The chairman sighed. "He resigned yesterday. He knew the investigation was closing in. The board has also referred the matter to our legal team." Ethan simply nodded. He felt no satisfaction, only sadness. One man's ambition had nearly destroyed hundreds of lives. The elderly board member leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, we know an apology can't erase what happened. It can't give you back those nights you spent suffering. But we're asking for one opportunity. Help us save this company." Ethan looked through the office window. Employees were walking across the courtyard. Some laughed together. Others carried boxes between buildings. None of them were responsible for what Victor had done. If Harrison collapsed, thousands of families would lose their jobs. Children would lose opportunities. Parents would lose income. The innocent would suffer again. That thought weighed heavily on his heart. "I have one condition," the chairman immediately answered. "Anything." Ethan turned toward him. "If I return, no employee will ever be fired without a complete investigation." The chairman nodded. "Agreed. Second, there will be complete transparency. No hidden reports. No secret meetings. No politics. Only honesty. Agreed. And finally, Ethan looked each board member in the eyes. I choose every executive on my leadership team. No exceptions. The board members exchanged quick glances. After only a few seconds, the chairman smiled. You have our full support. Ethan slowly opened the employment contract. He picked up the pen lying beside it. For a brief moment, his mind drifted back to that cold supermarket parking lot. The freezing nights, the public gym showers, the lonely dinners, the security guard who had handed him a warm sandwich, his mother's encouraging voice, Richard Morgan's faith in him. Every painful memory had led him to this moment. He signed the contract. The chairman stood first. Then every board member followed. They applauded quietly, not because they had hired a new CEO, but because they finally believed the company had hope again. News spread across the business world within hours. Ethan Carter returns to Harrison Industrial Solutions as CEO. Television networks covered the announcement. Business websites called it one of the most remarkable corporate comebacks in recent history. Employees filled social media with messages of excitement. Many of the workers who had once watched Ethan leave with a cardboard box couldn't believe the news. One warehouse employee smiled as he read the headline. I always knew he'd come back. Another quietly replied, yeah, but none of us imagined he'd come back as the boss. That evening, before making a single decision as CEO, Ethan drove somewhere he hadn't visited in almost 2 years. The supermarket parking lot. He parked in the exact same corner where he had spent countless nights sleeping inside his old silver sedan. He turned off the engine, stepped outside, and looked around. Everything looked the same. The bright lights, the empty parking spaces, the quiet night air. Only one thing had changed. Him. He gently placed his hand on the hood of the old car. You carried me. When nobody else would. Just then, someone called out from behind. Excuse me. Ethan turned around. It was the same security guard. A little older. A little grayer. The guard smiled politely. You look familiar. Ethan smiled back. You once gave a homeless man a sandwich. The guard stared at him for a moment. Then recognition filled his face. I remember. You slept right over there. Ethan nodded. I did. The guard looked at the expensive suit. The luxury company car parked nearby. Then back at Ethan. I guess things worked out. Ethan smiled warmly. They did. But I never forgot the person who reminded me that I wasn't invisible. The guard's eyes filled with tears. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness changes a life forever. And tomorrow morning, Ethan Carter would walk back into Harrison Industrial Solutions, not as the man they had thrown away, but as the leader they desperately needed. The next morning, for the first time in more than 2 years, Ethan Carter walked through the front entrance of Harrison Industrial Solutions. The same glass doors, the same marble floor, the same reception desk. But everything felt different. 2 years earlier, he had left carrying a cardboard box, his head lowered, his future uncertain. Today, every employee standing in the lobby stopped what they were doing. One by one, they stood. No one had been told to. No one had been asked. Respect had done what authority never could. Silence filled the building. Then someone quietly began clapping. Another employee joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire lobby echoed with applause. Some employees smiled. Others wiped tears from their eyes. Many remembered the day Ethan had been escorted out. Many had wanted to defend him. But fear had kept them silent. Today, fear was gone. Ethan simply smiled and nodded. Thank you. Then he walked toward the elevator. Not like a man returning for revenge, but like a leader returning with purpose. An hour later, every employee gathered inside the company auditorium. Nearly 1,200 people filled the room. Whispers spread through the audience. What will the new CEO say? Will there be layoffs? Will everything change? The chairman stepped onto the stage. After a brief introduction, he invited Ethan forward. The applause lasted almost a full minute. Ethan waited patiently until the room became quiet. He looked across the crowd. Warehouse workers, receptionists, engineers, managers, janitors, executives, people from every level of the company. Then he began. 2 years ago, I walked out of this building believing my career was over. I won't pretend those days weren't painful. They were. I lost my job, my apartment, my reputation. I even lost my home. The room became completely silent. For several months, my home was an old silver sedan parked in a supermarket parking lot. Gasps spread across the audience. Many employees couldn't believe what they were hearing. Ethan continued calmly. I could have blamed the world. I could have become bitter. I could have spent every day planning revenge. He paused. But revenge never builds a better future. Character does. He looked directly at the employees. So today, I make every one of you a promise. No employee will ever lose their job here without a fair investigation. No honest worker will ever be punished because of office politics. And every voice will matter. The auditorium erupted into applause. Some employees stood. Then everyone else followed. Over the next 6 months, the company changed in ways no one expected. Executives no longer worked behind closed doors. Every Friday, Ethan held an open meeting where any employee could speak directly to him. Suggestions that had been ignored for years were finally implemented. Production improved. Customer satisfaction reached record levels. The factories reopened. New contracts arrived. Investors returned. Within 1 year, Harrison Industrial Solutions recorded the highest profits in its history. Business magazines called it the greatest corporate comeback of the decade. One afternoon, Richard Morgan visited Ethan's office. The two men looked out over the city skyline. Richard smiled. I always knew you'd change this company. Ethan laughed softly. I couldn't have done it without you. Richard shook his head. No, you could have. You just needed someone to believe in you. The two men shook hands. Not as employer and employee, but as lifelong friends. That weekend, Ethan drove to the countryside to visit his mother. Margaret welcomed him with the same warm hug she had given him since childhood. As they sat on the porch drinking tea, she noticed a familiar car parked outside. The old sedan. You still have it. Ethan smiled. I'll never sell it. She looked at him curiously. Even now. He nodded. That car carried me through the hardest nights of my life. When everyone else walked away, it stayed. Margaret gently squeezed his hand. Sometimes the things we almost lose become the things we value the most. Several months later, Ethan received an invitation to speak at a national business leadership conference. Thousands of young professionals filled the auditorium. Many were just beginning their careers. Others had already experienced failure. Ethan stood at the podium. He smiled. Then he asked one simple question. How many of you have ever felt like giving up? Almost every hand in the room went up. He nodded. So did I. I slept in my car. I was betrayed. I was blamed for things I never did. But here's what I learned. He paused. Your circumstances are temporary. Your character is permanent. The audience listened in complete silence. The people who hurt you don't decide your future. You do. And sometimes, the greatest comeback begins the moment everything falls apart. The audience rose to their feet. The applause continued for several minutes. That evening, Ethan drove home in his new company car. As he entered his garage, he parked beside the old silver sedan. He walked over, placed his hand gently on its hood, and smiled, not because it was valuable, but because it reminded him where he had been, how far he had come, and why he would never stop believing in people who refused to quit. Because success isn't measured by the size of your office, or the title on your business card. It's measured by the lives you lift along the way. The end.